Welcome everyone, and thanks for tuning in to our new chilling video. It means a lot you watch the channel and become a part of the horror motives world. Tonight we have a terrifying compilation video for you to enjoy, and if you are new here, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss a chilling video. And remember, fear lies within. For some background context, I'm a 28-year-old male from Basingstoke in the UK. I often exercise outdoors, going for runs, cycles and hikes, occasionally challenging myself and taking part in triathlons. Not only that, but running is a hobby of mine and a way for me to switch off and helps me feel better. Back in 2017, this terrifying encounter happened to me whilst out on a run. I had been struggling to sleep, so I was trying different things to help me. I hadn't been having much luck, so I thought jogging strangely relaxed me. I would go for a jog on the evenings to help tire me out. This seemed to work for the most part, but one evening I was restless and knew there was no point in me going to bed as I would just be lying there with my brain still ticking. I'm sure a lot of you understand that. So, looking at the time, it was 11 PM, it was night, but the middle of summer, so still mild weather, and with that I decided I would go for a nighttime jog. I told my partner as I was getting ready, and she was getting into bed, so she wasn't thrilled with me going out so late to jog, but I had done it many times before and I didn't see the big issue. So as I got ready and said goodbye, I left the house for my midnight jog. There was a park close to where we lived that backed onto the woods. I'd jogged through the park so many times before, so knowing what route I was going to take, I began my journey. As I jogged the streets, unsurprisingly the roads were empty, most people in bed asleep. The occasional car driving past, probably thinking, what weirdos jog at this time at night, but I didn't care. I reached the park and made my way inside, following the path as I jogged through. Halfway through the park, I came up to the entrance to the woods. With the park being empty and it being night, I thought to myself, why not jog through the woods? Something different. And with that, I left the path and ventured into the woods. Obviously, there were dirt paths to follow into the woods, as people had made trails there over time. As I continued my jog, I went deeper into the woods, following the dirt trail. It wasn't long before I'd made my way further inside when I heard the sound of rustling coming from the right of me in the distance. I slowed my pace as I looked to the right. I couldn't see anything, but instantly got paranoid. Hearing a sound in the middle of the woods at night will do that to you. So, with me then trying to remain quiet, I thought it was obviously some woodland animal, a badger or a fox or something like that. With silence falling again, I picked up my pace and continued with my jog. Not 2 minutes later, I heard the rustling coming up from ahead of me again. I again slowed my pace, trying to remain quiet as I continued looking out for what was causing the noise. Putting it down to an animal, I tried not to disturb whatever it was. As I continued to jog through the woods, I approached a clearing, thinking I'd get back on track and out through the other side back to the main park and make my way home. I slowed to take a breather. As I made my way forward, looking around, my eyes instantly fell upon a figure, sitting in the dark, on what looked to be a worn bench in the clearing. As I slowly continued walking through, I couldn't help but stare, thinking who sits alone in the middle of the woods at night? But as I slowly got closer, passing the figure, I soon had an uncomfortable wave of nerves wash over me. With being closer and the slight moonlight breaking through, this wasn't just a person sitting on the bench. This was someone dressed as a clown, sitting there staring right back at me. Their emotionless stare looked right at me, as they didn't even blink. I broke eye contact and continued walking past. Freaked out, thinking what the fuck? I couldn't help but look back and take one more look. But as I turned, I saw the clown was no longer sitting, but standing, watching my every move as its emotionless face turned into a smile, as they just stood there staring at me. Now, I had never seen anything like this out on a jog before, and my decision to take a late night jog and come through the woods didn't seem like the brightest idea anymore. Feeling like their eyes were burning into the back of me, I was about to set off into a jog again, getting the hell out of there, when the sound of running footsteps sent a chill up my spine. I turned to see the clown running right towards me. It scared the shit out of me, and wasting no time I broke out into a run as my adrenaline-fueled legs pelted through the woods. I ran as fast as I could, all the while hearing the tailing footsteps behind me. I didn't stop until I could see the pathway to the park in front of me. Seeing this gave me an extra surge of energy as I broke out onto the path, back into the streetlight. I continued to run from where I exited the woods, until I could no longer hear footsteps behind me. Turning and looking back, I could see the outline of the clown staring and waving at me as they disappeared back into the woods. I could feel my heart racing. Honestly, I'd never been so terrified. I continued my jog back to some sort of civilization as I jogged out of the park, back to the streets just wanting to get home. I told my partner that night when I arrived back, and with her thinking I was stupid to go jogging through the woods, she thought it was strange and terrifying for someone to be dressed as a clown in the middle of the woods at night. Telling my friends about my encounter, they didn't believe me, but I can honestly say as much as I wish it wasn't real. It was. I don't know what their intentions were, or what would have happened to me if they had caught up to me. Most likely they got what they wanted, scaring the crap out of someone. But you just don't know. There may have been some more sinister intent. Since then, I've never been jogging back through them woods, and now stick to visible areas and jog at a reasonable time. There are some real freaks out there, no matter where you are. So, stay safe out there. I'm from Chicago, Austin, and this encounter that happened to me is one that I will always remember. I'm a 48-year-old male who lives alone. One evening after finishing work, I stopped off to get myself some beers and a takeout, as I was too tired to cook. It had been a long day, and I was just looking forward to getting back and relaxing with a few drinks. It was a cold evening, and it got dark early as it was mid-November as this happened. As I got home, I enjoyed my pizza and cracked open a few beers looking for a good documentary to watch. I'm into crime and managed to find a good Australian crime documentary detailing events that had happened in the outback. Halfway through it, and a couple of beers in, I got up to pee before opening another beer and returning to my night's pick of viewing. I was engrossed by the documentary. With it being a crime, I was only slightly familiar with the events, as I had only briefly read about it before. It was fascinating. It was then I was brought back to my reality, when there was a knock at my door. I looked at the time and saw it was just after 11 p.m. I wasn't expecting any visitors, and never had anyone knock on that late before. I assumed maybe it was my neighbor and something may have been up. So, as I approached, that's what I was expecting, to see my neighbor. But as I opened up and looked through the screen door, I could clearly see that it was not my neighbor. Instead, it was someone I had never seen before. I had trouble seeing the man's face as his hood was up and he was looking down to one side. Without opening the shutter, I asked if I could help him, and why he was knocking on my door so late. After a brief pause, the man finally spoke.
"Is Greg there?"
He asked me in a husky, chilling voice. Confused, I told the man he must have the wrong house. No one called Greg lived here. I don't even know anyone called Greg. As I said this, the man finally looked up, giving me a better look at his face. But with that, it instantly made me feel on edge, as he looked anything but friendly. There was something about the way he stared through the shutter that gave me a chill.
"Where's Greg?"
He again asked, in a more impatient tone this time. I again repeated myself, telling him no one by that name lived here or was here. He had the wrong place and for him to leave. As I went to shut my door, the man suddenly tried to pull open my shutter. This sent my pulse racing as I grabbed the handle from my side. Luckily, it was locked. I shouted at the man to get his hands off my door and remove himself from my property, and threatened that I was calling the police. He stopped, letting go of the handle as he banged his hands on the shutter, glaring angrily through it. I slammed the front door shut, grabbing my phone, repeating that I was calling the cops. As I looked out the window, I could see the man walking off down my path and out of sight. Freaked out by the encounter, thinking what the fuck was that about? I stared out the window for a good few minutes, until I was sure the man was gone. Calming down slightly, I put my phone down and decided against calling the cops. The man had now gone, and he clearly had the wrong place. So feeling calmer and safe, I decided again not to call the cops, and instead locked my door and got back to my last beer and the end of the documentary, before calling it a night and heading to bed. Before heading upstairs, the stranger at my door still playing on my mind, I had one final check outside, making sure there was no sign of anyone, especially that man. Upon looking, there was no one. Feeling relieved, I double-checked the front and back door was locked, then made my way to bed. That night, even though tired, I struggled to sleep. I would wake up soon after, restless. I think my mind was just overthinking from the events of that evening. I'd drift in and out of sleep, thinking I'd hear things. I finally managed to calm myself and fall asleep. I don't know for how long, but again I woke, this time not thinking I heard something, but knowing I did. Something woke me up. My room pitch black, I sat up, frozen to my bed as my heart began to race. As I listened, all I could hear was the sound of heavy breathing coming from the corner of my room. Fear taking over me as my eyes tried adjusting to the room. I could just about make out the dark figure of someone standing in the corner of my room. Heart pounding, I managed to muster the words, "Who the fuck's in my house?" Then, a moment I will never forget. The figure spoke.
Where is Greg?
These words made me physically sick. It was the guy from earlier. In my house. The figure began to move closer. I could now see a shiny object in his hand. The guy had a knife. At this point, the adrenaline kicked in. Reaching for my dresser, I pulled out my handgun and aimed it in the direction of the man, screaming to get the fuck back. I don't think he had expected me to have a gun, but I'm so lucky I did. The man ran out of the room. I lunged off the bed and followed as I shot down the stairs. My front door was still locked. I heard the restroom door slam shut and lock. I ran to the door, shouting I was calling the cops as I shot a warning shot into the door. After managing to get the door open, I could see the room was empty. I could also see how the man entered, through the small square window situated in my restroom. I had left it open and not checked it was closed. After calling the cops, they arrived on the scene 20 minutes or so later, and I told them everything. About the man coming to my door earlier that night, and then breaking in, also about him demanding to see someone called Greg. The next day, I couldn't believe it, but they'd caught the man. It turns out he was recently released from prison after serving a long sentence for a crime he committed. It was later found that where I live, the previous owner was a man called Greg, and this was his last known location. The man obviously thought he still lived there, or that I was associated with him when he came to my door. That night scared the shit out of me. It was a surreal situation to find myself in, and something I'll always think of. Remember, always check all your doors and windows are locked at night. I'm from Manitoba, Canada, and what I'm about to share with you is an encounter that happened to me a few years back that not only terrified me to my core, but also made me look at the world differently as a whole. Some people may not believe what I have to say, and that's fine, but I know what I believe, and I can assure you, I wish I didn't believe it myself, but it was very much real. I was driving back home from a work trip. I'd been working away for a few nights. The journey back was therapeutic. I was alone with my thoughts and travelling up near the Boreal forest with my route taking me through some beautiful wilderness along the journey. As I drove along, the sky way greying and the last dying embers of sunlight were leaving the sky as the winter night was beginning to take shape. I'd been driving for a fair few hours, but didn't want to stop off as I had wanted to get back that night. It had been a long few days and I was looking forward to the weekend. The cars got fewer and further between as I travelled down the long winding road. As I was tucked between towering rows of trees either side, I reached for my coffee, taking a sip as I fueled myself with caffeine. As I looked to place my cup back into its holder next to me, I almost spilled it everywhere, missing the holder. Taking my eyes off the road for a second, I just about got it back into place without getting coffee everywhere. As I looked back up, It was then my eyes drifted to the side of the road ahead, where they were met with the sight of a man coming into view, as he stood on the side of the road holding his arm out. At first, I didn't see him straight away, being occupied with the coffee, and only having my eyes off the road for a second. It was like they came out of nowhere, like they had just walked out from the trees. I passed, staring at the person as I tried to slow down, but seeing the person late, I ended up pulling over to a stop, albeit slightly further down the road. Willing to give this guy a ride, I flashed my hazards to signal them to come over. I'm a friendly enough guy, and I'm always willing to help if someone's in need. I've picked up hitchhikers before. Now, I know it's not for everyone, and you're within your rights to ask, how can you trust picking up a complete stranger? You're right, I can't really, but for some reason that never stopped me before. As I was saying, I flashed my lights to signal. As I looked out my rearview mirror, the person just stood there, in the distance, staring at my car. I wound down my window and waved my arm again, gesturing for them to come over. After what seemed to be an age, the person finally began to make their way over to the car, with the sunlight having almost completely faded. I couldn't really see what they looked like. As I continued to watch them from my mirror, and they slowly neared, I finally began to make out the gaunt, pale face of the person, and to my surprise, the size of them. I hadn't noticed that before, as they must have been sloped, and from a distance, when passing, they didn't look as tall. But now I could clearly see. This person was fucking unusually tall. Looking again as I tried to make out their face, it was then I noticed their eyes. Their eyes were all black. Thinking, what the fuck, as they approached, I anchored my head out the window looking back, and in that moment, a sense of dread and fear washed over me. Having a clear look at this person now as they homed in on my car, I don't know how else to say it, but this person's legs, they weren't normal legs. They were dog-like legs, as resembling a dog standing on its hind legs, hairy and grey in colour. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. This thing was right next to my car now, grey in colour, and taking in what I was actually seeing. It was like it was half man, half dog-like. Without wasting another second, I pushed down on the accelerator and sped off. Not understanding what it was I had just witnessed, looking back out my rearview mirror, I could feel the panic course through me as my eyes widened. To my horror, this thing was chasing after my car at an unnatural speed, not possible from a human. I sped up as fast as I could, my heart racing as I saw a set of headlights coming towards me in the distance. I flashed my lights, hoping to get the oncoming vehicle's attention and for them to see, but as I looked back in my rearview mirror, the thing chasing me down was gone, like it had disappeared out of sight. I didn't stop to find out as I hightailed it out of there, thinking non-stop about what the hell I had just seen. The oncoming car must have caused it to go back into the forest. After that night, when telling my friends and family what I saw, a lot of what I said was met with skepticism. No one really took what I said seriously, apart from one person, my dad. When I told him, I could see it in his eyes. The fear. He told me that he believed me, and that he had a similar encounter when he was younger, when out hunting, and that there are things out there that we don't know about. After discussions and doing further research, I fully believe I'd crossed paths with a skinwalker that night. I read through many descriptions, and that's the only thing I can relate what I saw to. Some people may not believe, but honestly, I know what I saw, and it still scares me today, knowing that they are out there. I'm a 25-year-old male who lives by myself in an apartment complex in my city, Detroit. The area I live in is, to be honest, not the best. It's a rough neighborhood, and crime is pretty high with the wrong type of people around. But my current living situation is due to change after this incident happened to me not too long ago. I'm not usually home a lot, with either work or going out to see friends, but recently I found myself staying in a bit more than I would usually like. The reason for that is doing some online courses to try and get into the job field I want to. I'm pretty much on my laptop most evenings, and I'm a chilled out, laid back kind of guy. I was studying one of my courses late one evening when there was a loud bang on my door. It was around midnight, so I thought it was strange as I wasn't expecting anybody to drop by. Anyway, I put my laptop aside and went to my door to see who it was. As I opened it slightly, I could see a man pacing outside my door, who I noticed as a guy who had recently moved in next door to me. He had been there about a week, so I opened the door more, asking him if he was okay and what was up. When he acknowledged me, he stopped pacing and stared directly at me with a blank expression for about a good 30 seconds, which I found weird. When I again was about to ask him why he had knocked, he suddenly spoke, cutting me off. He banged his hand, resting it on my door as he leaned in towards me, saying, "You need to be quiet in there. I can hear you moving and being loud and it's pissing me off." Taken aback by this, I said, "Excuse me?" I was confused as I was literally just sat in my apartment on my laptop, no TV or no music on, nothing that could remotely be loud. "I can hear you, and if it continues, you won't want me coming back round again." Stunned by this, as I'd only ever spoken to this guy once, saying, "Hey," when he'd moved in. But from looking at him now and his actions, I could tell he was on something. I said, "Look, I'm not sure what you're on about. It can't be me. I'm just about to go to sleep, okay? So you won't be hearing anything anyway. And if you do, it's not from me." Annoyed and confused by the sudden encounter, I said my piece and shut the door. As I did, I could hear the guy mumbling something to himself outside as he walked back to his apartment and slammed the door. After that, I couldn't concentrate at all, as all I was thinking was, what the hell was he on about? I hadn't been doing anything. So, calling it a night, I packed my stuff away and went to bed. Not long after I did, I could again hear this arsehole talking aloud, and he followed that by banging on the wall between our apartments. What the hell was this guy's problem, I thought. I really wanted to bang back at that moment, but I'm not the most confrontational guy, and thought to myself he's clearly on drugs, and he probably wouldn't remember this in the morning, even though that isn't an excuse, but I let it go. And sure enough, there was no more banging, and I managed to fall asleep without any more commotion that night. The next evening, when I returned from work, I was walking up my hallway as I was about to pass the guy's apartment next to mine. I slowly went past, listening to see if I could hear anything, but I couldn't. I was pretty sure he wasn't home. In the moment, I'd had in mind knocking on and talking about the night before, but I thought better of it. From seeing what type of person he was, I didn't want the hassle, and just hoped it was a one-off and wouldn't happen again. I continued to my apartment to chill out for the night and do some more studying. Later that night, as I was finishing up on my laptop, tired from a long day, I decided it was time to get some sleep, as I had an early start in the morning. As I was shutting down and listening to the end of a song through my headphones, I could hear the distinct sound of banging coming from my front door. The banging was aggressively hard as I could feel the shudder of the door from where I was sitting. I pulled out my headphones and stared at the door, not quite believing it could be that guy again. Then as I went to stand, 4 more loud bangs shuddered through the door. At this point, I had had enough if it was him, which I assumed it was. What the hell was his problem now? I rushed to the door and opened it, and again, I come face to face with the guy from next door, pacing outside of mine. At this point, I wasn't in any mood to take any shit, so in an annoyed tone I said, "What?" The guy stopped pacing as he stood right in front of me again, just staring for a while. I could clearly see his pupils were dilated, and I noticed his sweaty, greying skin. "I can hear you again. What the fuck did I tell you about the noise and if I had to come back?" He aggressively spat at me. The guy was crazy. I hadn't made any kind of noise all night. Frankly, at that point, I was angry with all the attitude and the false accusations he was blaming me for. My adrenaline beginning to pump as I knew I had to stand my ground. I said, "Listen, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, but I'm not making any noise, so you need to fuck off. And if you continue with your aggressive and threatening behavior, I'll call the cops, okay?" As I said what I said, nerves began to creep in, as I saw the way the guy stared at me, how he looked like he hated me. I told him I was going and slowly began to shut my door. As I did, I heard him say, "Oh, you'll be sorry." His door slammed as he went back to his apartment. Kind of freaked out by what he meant by that, I made sure my door was locked too. I headed to bed thinking about what I was going to do if this continued, already dreading the next night. It didn't take me long to drift off that night, but I was soon woken to the sound of what seemed like a crashing sound, coming from my apartment. Luckily I'm a light sleeper, and shot up to listen. I could hear movement in my apartment, the sound of someone walking around. My heart began to race as I knew fully well someone was inside. As I was about to get up, I froze. As footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door, my door handle began to rotate as someone tried to get in. The sound of the door unclicking sent a shiver down my spine as fear took over. As I mentioned, I live in a dodgy area, so I always sleep with a bat by my bed, and at that moment I reached for it, gripping it tight. I stood up as my bedroom door creaked open, and as I turned the light on next to my bed, to my horror it lit up my next door neighbor, standing in my doorway. Not only standing there, but holding a knife. The hairs on my neck stood up. As I screamed at him, what the hell was he doing? It was then he bellowed at me. He told me I'd be sorry, breaking out into a run as he lunged at me. Fearing for my life, I swung the bat before he could get any closer, as I made clean contact with his arm, knocking the knife out of his hand. Not wasting another second, I swung it again, as it struck him on the side of the head, knocking him to the floor. He was knocked out. I ran out of my room as I grabbed the phone, calling the police, explaining to them what had happened. They arrived pretty soon, as I waited outside my apartment, too afraid to stay inside, so I kept an eye on the door. They found the man where I had left him, in my room, still unconscious. When they got him to come round, they arrested him for breaking and entering with the intent to cause physical harm. The look in that man's eyes that night was filled with hatred. If I hadn't have woken up that night, I'm pretty sure he would have taken my life as I slept. It was found he'd had a history of assault charges, and had been in and out of prison on those and drug-related offences. I'm currently looking for a new place to live, as after that night, I really don't feel safe in my own home, or even living in that area anymore. I was on the lookout for a new recliner chair. The current one I had is pretty worn and on its last legs, so wanting to get a new one, I thought I didn't really want to be paying out too much, and decided to browse Craigslist to see what I could find. I'd used Craigslist many times before. The marketplace wasn't new to me. I had bought items and sold items on the platform with no real issues. So when I began my search for a new recliner, I knew where to begin, and it didn't take me long to find a few options. As I browsed through the ads, I filtered through the ones that didn't really appeal to me. Some were tattered and the pictures didn't look great, but then after some digging, I found one that really caught my eye for a good price. It was black leather, and that would already match the sofa set I already had in the house. It was listed for a reasonable price, so not waiting around, I contacted the seller and inquired about viewing the item. When the seller answered, I said hello. There was a long pause, so much so I thought no one was there and was about to put the phone down, when I then heard breathing down the phone, followed by a hoarse-voiced hello. I said, "Oh, hey, I saw your ad for the recliner on Craigslist and was interested in coming to see it." There was again a long pause, with just the sound of breathing, until finally the seller said, "Oh yeah, that thing. Sure. Well, it's a storage unit currently. What I can do is get it out and load it onto my van and bring it your way. If you like it after seeing it, we can talk about a price and you can have it." I said to the man, "That's great, but not being keen on having him come here, I offered to go to the storage unit to view it myself." "The storage unit's a while away, so to save you the journey, I can collect it and bring it your way. It's no problem. And if you don't want the chair, don't worry. Don't feel inclined that you have to buy it." Hearing the seller say this, and alleviating the pressure of feeling I would have to buy it after he drove out of his way, I thought it would save me the journey, and he seemed like a reasonable guy, so I agreed, and we set a day and time, and I gave him the address. A few days later, on the day I was expecting the guy to arrive with the chair, I couldn't seem to get through to him when calling or texting to double check that he was still coming. I got no reply, and the phone seemed to ring out. It had gotten to the late afternoon, and after waiting the majority of the day, I assumed that was it. The guy wasn't coming, and I'd wasted my time. As I was getting ready to head out, there was a knock at my door. I stopped what I was doing as I went and looked out the window. I could see a van parked out front at the bottom of my drive. As I went to the door and opened it, there was an older man standing in the door as he said, "Hey, I'm here with the chair." Surprised he'd come, I said how I had tried to get in touch with him and assumed he wasn't coming. He chuckled to himself as he looked at me and said he was sorry, but he had lost his phone. Luckily, he'd wrote the address down when we spoke the other day. He didn't want to hold me up any longer, and the chair was in the back of the van if I wanted to come and check it out. Not wanting him to have wasted his journey and really wanting to get the chair, I said of course and was happy he had actually turned up. As we reached the back of the van, he stopped me, as he said sorry if the van smells a bit. He often uses the van when hunting and storing the animals. I didn't really need to know that, but thanks for the heads up, I thought. As he opened the van, I couldn't really smell anything that bad, which was good, and as he had the chair right at the front, it was easy to see. We looked it over and it was in mint condition. It was great. The seller lowered it out of the van as to get a better look and test it out. As I sat in it, it was comfy. The levers worked with no issues. I was sold. I said I'd take it, and a smile crept across the seller's face. He seemed just as happy to make the sale as I was buying it. I asked him if he would accept a little less than the asking price, as a part of the leather on the top shoulder was grazed. Expecting him to say no and stick to the asking price, he said he hadn't even noticed that, and sure, he would accept slightly lower. Wow, I thought. I had literally picked myself up a great deal. The seller helped me get it in the house before taking the money, thanking me for my time and leaving. After positioning my new purchase and rearranging a few things in the room to make it fit well, I headed out to meet my friend for the plans we had that night. Later that night, we arrived back. My friend had come to mine and we were going to have a beer before he went home. As we walked into my house, I turned on the light and showed him my new chair in the front room, telling him to have a seat whilst I got the beers. As I was getting the beers, it was then my friend called me asking what the smell was in the room. I didn't know what he was talking about, so walking in with the beers, I stepped in the room as I sniffed to smell what he was talking about. And sure enough, I too could smell an unpleasant stench that smelt like, to put it bluntly, shit. Now, I have a cat, so I naturally checked to see if they had peed or crapped in the room anywhere, as cat crap stinks. But I couldn't find anything. I got some air freshener and sprayed it around the room to mask the smell until I could pinpoint what it was. We sat and had our beers as we discussed what we thought it was. My friend suggested I check if I had a leak anywhere from the bathroom, or see if a waste pipe was leaking, as the bathroom was directly above. It was late, and we had a few more beers before calling it a night. I said if it was the same tomorrow, I'd investigate further to see what it was. The next day I woke up, and getting myself ready, I walked downstairs, making myself a coffee. As I went to my front room, I was again hit with the same smell. But this time it was worse. Like it had settled overnight and filled the room. It smelt like a rotting animal. I couldn't understand where it was coming from. There was no leak. The smell wasn't coming from the pipe. It was then, as I searched the room, I thought the smell only appeared since I got the recliner in here. As I leant into the recliner, examining it, the smell had to be coming from the chair. Then I remember the guy saying about his van and the animals he would keep in there. Had the smell seeped into the leather of the cushion of the chair? Could that be what it was? As I maneuvered the chair and extended it out, it was then I could see the bottom of the chair. Where the zip was, on the bottom of the chair, that led inside the base of the chair, the zip itself had a cable tie clamped to it. I thought that was strange straight away, so I headed to the kitchen, got some scissors and returned to cut it off. I lay down, cutting off the cable tie, as I placed it aside, my fingers grabbing the zip as I slowly pulled it across the opening of the base of the chair. As I opened it, the smell increased tenfold. It was coming from inside the chair. As I slowly reached in to see what the hell was inside, my hand was met with a hard, square object. As I pulled it out, it was a tattered box. I placed it on the floor as I sat next to it, my breathing becoming heavy as I tried to hold my breath. Whatever the smell was, it was coming from inside that box. My heart began to race as my hand slowly hovered over the lid. Did I want to see what was inside? I slowly pulled the top off the box and instantly heaved as I moved away from the box. What lay inside was a rotting pair of severed hands, placed together holding what seemed to be a decomposing heart. Instantly, I threw up from seeing what the smell was, my eyes watering. I couldn't believe my eyes. I called the police as I explained to them what I had found. What followed was myself being questioned, my living room cordoned off whilst everything was investigated. I explained to the police about purchasing the chair off a seller on Craigslist days prior. I couldn't give them much information on him, only a description of the seller and his van. I didn't even get his name. The post obviously gone, and no other post from the same person. His number non-existent, and I don't even know where he lived as he brought the chair to me. All the findings were bagged for evidence, and both them and the chair taken for examining. As far as I'm aware, this is still unsolved, and I have no idea who that man was, and if what was found in that chair was related to a crime that he had committed. I still have questions. Did he know it was there or forget? Was his intention to have this found someday? I just don't know. It still shocks me today what I found, and just the situation I found myself in from buying a chair. I've heard my fair share of crazy stories, but I never thought I'd have one quite like this myself. It's a rare thing to happen, but I still don't buy off Craigslist anymore. When it comes to dating apps, let's just say I'm definitely not a fan and don't recommend them. That's mainly down to the nightmare experience I had myself using Tinder. Now, I'd been trying dating apps for a month or so. I was new to them and just exploring to see what it was all about. I had matched and met one guy off there at the time, and the date didn't go great. We met up for drinks, but ended up saying our goodbyes and going our separate ways. After the first date, I continued to use the app and ended up matching with another guy, who, in all fairness, caught my eye straight away. He was tall, handsome, and had amazing blue eyes. After messaging back and forth with flirtatious banter, I thought this was going well, and maybe dating apps were in fact useful. After a few days messaging, that's when Mark asked to take me out on a date and meet. I liked the thought of meeting him and definitely wanted to go on the date and get to know him better. So, we planned a day and time and arranged to go for a meal and drinks in town. When the night came, and as I got ready for the date, I couldn't decide what to wear. Did I go with a dress and leather jacket, or blouse shirt and leather pants? It took me a while to decide what to wear, but finally being happy with my choice, and making sure my makeup was on point, I headed into town for the date. As I reached the restaurant, I texted Mark to tell him I was there. It wasn't long until I got a reply, saying he could see me. And as I looked up, sure enough, he was there, as he waved over to me. It was definitely him from the pictures, which was great. He greeted me with a smile and a hug, as he said how nice it was to finally meet in person. We entered the restaurant and checked into our table. As the night progressed and we had a few glasses of wine, I thought how well the date was going. We laughed, shared stories, and seemed to bond well. Throughout the date, I couldn't help but think there may be something here. As we finished up our meal and got the check, Mark suggested the idea of going on a nice walk to let our food go down, suggesting we take a stroll through the park around the corner. I thought it was a nice idea and agreed, as I didn't think either of us wanted the date to end at that time. As we paid our bill and left the restaurant, we began our walk to the park. Even though it was dark, we didn't care as we continued to talk, Mark leading the way as we entered the park. Being late on in the evening, it was, as you'd expect, quiet and peaceful, with people few and far between. As we continued walking into the park, we left the hustle of the streets behind us, Mark suggesting we follow a certain route where he knew there was a beautiful spot by the lake. Within the park, I followed as he held out his arm for me to grab onto. As we continued to walk, it became quieter. The further we retreated into the park, the less there was around us. We'd been walking for a while now, and I remember saying to Mark, maybe we should head back soon. He didn't respond though. As we walked, he became more quiet and less chatty than usual. I asked if everything was alright as he said everything was fine and for us to keep walking. We were almost there. As we continued, I noticed Mark scanning the area like he was looking around for something. I know you may think how stupid of me not to think this before, but it was only then I got that uncomfortable feeling that I was walking with someone I didn't really know at all. I mean, it was our first date, and as well as it had gone, I didn't really know him, yet I'd walked into a quiet park at night with him. As this thought finally dawned on me, I began to question our decision to come into the park, having this gut feeling suddenly kick in. I told Mark I thought we should turn back, and that I wanted to head back right then. He turned and looked at me with annoyance, as if angry that I was asking to go back as he said no. I told him I was going to head back either way. As I went to turn, his grip tightened on my wrist as he squeezed, pulling me towards him. Shocked, I told him to let go, and that he was hurting me as I tried to push him away. Again, his grip tightened, as his other hand grabbed my arm as he pulled me into the wooded area. My heart was racing. I was terrified at this point. The look on his face had changed from the nice guy I met to an angered, predatory look filling his eyes as he dragged me close to him, as he told me to get on my knees. I screamed as I kicked out to him, trying to get free, but my efforts were met with resistance as he overpowered me. I couldn't break free. As I lashed out, he pinned me up against a tree as I screamed. He told me to shut the fuck up and do as I'm told. Tears rolled down my face as he stood in front of me, breathing heavily. It was then a call came out from the distance, causing him to quickly look around. As he was distracted, I had to act fast, and with all my force I threw my knee up in between his legs, causing him to let go as he fell back in pain. I began to run, as again I heard the call from the distance. I could see coming into sight a man and a dog walking towards us. I screamed for help as the man saw me. I looked back as Mark was now back to his feet. The dog must have sensed the fear in me, as he began to bark and growl towards Mark, causing Mark to sprint off in the other direction, the dog giving chase. I ran towards the old man, as he hurried towards me, asking if I was okay. I told him what happened, as his dog came back into sight. The man stated he was walking his dog as he often does at night, and he had heard the screams in the distance. Concerned something was wrong, he came to check. I am so thankful that he did, as I can't comprehend what would have happened if he didn't. After calling the police and going through that traumatic experience, they took all the details off me, the description of Mark and where I'd met him. His dating profile was gone, but the restaurant we ate at was contacted to view the CCTV footage, which was a clear help gaining his identity when investigating. It wasn't long before he was found. I say he, as his name wasn't even Mark. He'd been using fake names and accounts on unsuspecting women, and had previous convictions for sexual assault. This time, he was finally taken off the streets and behind bars where he belongs. That experience has changed me in many ways. There is nothing scarier than going through something like that, and that is the reason I never use dating apps anymore. I urge you all to be careful out there when doing so. Really be sure who you're talking to before meeting, and don't make the same mistake I did. Thank you for joining us and watching this chilling video. We hope you enjoyed this topic and you found the fear within. What other subjects would you like to hear soon? Let us know in the comments what creeps you out. If you're new here, say hello, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Become a part of the Horror Motives world. See you soon with another terrifying video.